Not the one I wanted to use, but the one we'll use regardless. So here's the tier list. So this is going to be we're going to be talking about all of the Resident Evil films, all of the live action films, and pieces of media. I'm not going to include the animated ones in this. I think you could probably make a separate tier list of those anyway, and I don't see them on the same level as these films. You know. So I guess we do it in order of release. Maybe we start off with the original. So I think it's safe to say this one probably the best one. I mean, you know what? Actually, we should probably change this. There you go. How's that? I think that looks pretty good. Because I don't think out of all of these, anything is fucking dreadful. I mean, anything is great. Sorry. There's nothing here I'd say is a fucking top tier film. So we'll go with the first one. I probably have more of a sentimental value with this film. Because when I was, this is like the one I watched when I was a kid. And I really enjoyed it. I think it stands on its own as a pretty decent film. It's like, even though it kind of misses the mark in a lot of places, when you compare it to all of the other films, it's the most grounded film. And actually involves kind of a team of special elite soldiers going through a facility, which is like the first one. They kind of got it in there. The visuals are really fun. I think out of all of them, this is the one I like. This is the one where it stands well on its own. You know, Alice isn't superhuman in this one. You know, it's the most kind of grounded. It's the best way to put it. Apocalypse, I'm going to say that's good as well. Like the characters in it, like you just care about the characters. You know, even though half of them get killed in the first one or in the first like 30 minutes, it has more characters to it than the rest of the films. You know, everything after Apocalypse, which is why I'm putting Apocalypse in good as well. I think the second half of the film isn't as good. But probably one of the most loyal to these, like the original games. You know, the amount of like references they've got, the amount of characters they've got, even though they all take a sideline, like Jill and Carlos and Nikolai, all, and even Nemesis, all kind of take a bit of a sideline for Alice being the sickest fucking character ever. You know, so overpowered and so like whatever. You know, any moment that there was a time for Jill to shine, the game or the movie comes in and is like, nope, here's Alice, mate. She's fucking sick. They don't even bother giving you the names of certain characters because they're just going to die in 20 minutes anyway, you know? And it's kind of a rule of thumb. So we're going to move on to where I think the series kind of takes a massive downfall. Extinction is poor. It's not unbearable, but it's poor. I think I've seen this film twice. I don't remember anything. I saw this film recently. In fact, I've seen all of these recently. But I remember this one the least. Just not much happens in it. It's like they thought they were making an adaptation to a Mad Max film. If you like Mad Max, if you like the original Mad Max films as well, you might enjoy this because most of it's on the road and in the desert. But the third one, I think it's got like, kind of like Crimson Heads. It has dogs. It's really it. Some zombies as well, but crows as well, I think. I mean, this one really fucks around with Alice's weird powers. I think out of all of them, just kind of boring. Not much really happens. There's not that many notable moments. I can think for all of these other films, I can think of big set pieces. This one doesn't really have it. You know, they spend 5 minutes of crows attacking people. No one cares about crows, bro. Get them out of it. So gonna go to Afterlife. It's bad. Goes in bad for me. Step forward from Extinction to where it's poor, but it's I don't know. I just didn't really like it that much. They randomly throw in the Magini, and I think it is the Magini from Resi 5. You got the Executioner. You can kind of tell what era these films come in based on what enemies they decide to steal from Resi games. Resi 5 obviously came out recently when Afterlife did, because they even stole the whole Wesker and versus Chris scene from Resi 5 with the sunglasses and all that shit. Another thing as well is this game, or this film, I keep calling them games. This film is 3D as well, so if you don't have a 3D TV or whatever, it's very noticeable. It's got that kind of, you know, I take my glasses off, I throw at the screen, and it gets really super close, like, holy shit. And it just, a bit jarring. What's really weird is, like, they kind of bring in Claire into the third film, and she stays for the majority of the film. She isn't in the next one, for whatever reason. But Chris, he just disappears. Chris just completely just disappears after this film. No mention at all. He just comes in randomly. It just so happens that Claire's brother happens to be in this exact building locked up where he's been this whole time, supposedly. It doesn't make sense. Don't try to to look at these films and try to work out like a consistent storyline. There isn't one. Each film kind of ends on this weird, on like a cliffhanger, where the film afterwards would then go and retcon it, right? Like Apocalypse ends with them leaving the Umbrella facility, and it's like, oh, this is an interesting like cliffhanger. In the third film, no mention of that. That's just gone. Jill's missing as well. Just same with Extinction. Extinction ends with her finding all of the clones. In Afterlife, they fucking get rid of them in the first 15 minutes. Like they write themselves these big cliffhanger endings, and then when it comes to time to make the next film, they don't know what to do with it. They're like, what the fuck? How do we write this cliffhanger off in like 15 minutes? And you'll notice it does this with every single film, even the next 2 films coming up. And yeah, Wentworth Miller, he's a good actor, but not what I would pick for Chris Redfield at all. So we got what was the name of this one? Retribution. I'm gonna put that in decent. I think I'm like hot, only because I think I'm a little bit biased in this one. I've never seen the last 2 films until very recently, but not knowing what was going to happen, and the fact that it had Leon and it had more video game characters in it, and I quite liked the idea of, even though it wasn't very Resident Evil, it was in a big facility where it kind of, depending on the part of the facility you're in, you can be in Paris or Russia or New York. I thought that was kind of interesting, you know, kind of like these different, like I think it was definitely better than the others. It felt closer to Resident Evil than the previous 2 films. And even though it's not perfect, like, you know, they bring Jill back, the Los Plagas and all that, and it ends on this massive cliffhanger before the final film. And then when we get to the final film, nothing happens. It just writes it off. They didn't know what to do. It ends on this big fight, this big battle, teasing this huge thing between Wesker and the Red Queen. You know, fucking Wesker's in the White House. There's all this symbolism and all that shit. Nothing happens. And then we get to the final film, Resident Evil, the final chapter, which just picks up directly from there. The Red Queen and Wesker have changed sides. Jill, Ada and Leon and all these other fucking characters they brought in, gone, mate. Fucking disappeared. No reason at all. Just not mentioned. They spend all of Retribution kind of explaining that, like kind of building up to Alice saving this kind of clone little girl, kind of a bit like Sherry, I guess. Gone. Just no fucking reason. So, unbearable. That shit was whack. The way, like the intro to the film instantly tries to kind of set up the big plot twist for the film. I think what they realised is, oh fuck, we're 6 films in and we don't have many main characters. We don't have a big cast of characters. We don't have a central antagonist because we keep fucking killing them all. And it uses the whole like clone stuff a bit too much. Everyone seems to have a clone. Fucking not the greatest. Bit of a weird one. You've kind of got 2 Weskers as well. Like you've got like Dr. Isaacs, who is obviously meant to be like a Wesker type character when they introduced him in Apocalypse. I mean, he's even got Wesker's powers. And then meanwhile, Wesker is also in this film, and they don't know what to do with him because Dr. Isaacs has the role of Wesker. He has these superpowers. He can fucking, you know, beat the shit out of Alice and super speed and all that stuff. The thing is when I went into these films, watching them recently, I kind of kept the rule in my mind of, you know, just enjoy it for what it is, right? Take it for what it is. But when I was like a teenage Resident Evil fanboy, I would absolutely detest these films because just out of principle, innit? Just out of, oh, it's bad. You know, it's not Resident Evil. But now, growing up a bit, I can kind of look at these and at least enjoy them for what they are. But even kind of seeing it as not Capcom's Resident Evil, but Anderson's Resident Evil universe, it doesn't really make sense. You try to kind of work out where bits and pieces connect. It doesn't. Things just completely and utterly just retconned. In the first movie, she like Alice passes out because it's like, you know, they spray gas into her thing, and then that's why there's a big plot point to her having amnesia. She can't remember much. In the last film, they were like, oh, let's just completely change that. Nope, you're a clone. That's just it. You're a clone because, I don't know, we're going to release this T-virus vaccine. It's going to kill you, even though we've done it twice now in 2 different films where we've removed the T-virus from your body and taken your powers away from you, but also giving it back to you whenever we feel like it. As a Resident Evil fan, not great. If you're a romantic at heart, you might find it pretty humble that, you know, this dude made his wife the main character of these films and there was 6 films of her just kicking ass constantly. I guess we move on to the next piece of release Resident Evil live action media, which is Welcome to Raccoon City. I could go on about this all day. I actually don't mind this film, but the problem with Resident Evil, with this Resident Evil film, is that it's a massive missed opportunity. They pretty much stuffed the original trilogy into a 2-hour film. Visually, it's fucking amazing. In the sense that there's a lot of visual kind of references and stuff to a lot of Resident Evil fans. You know, the RPD's pretty loyal. The orphanage, they're all wearing their like costumes and stuff. And the one thing that I really enjoyed about this film was the fact that we get to see the build up to the outbreak, and we get to see the STARS members communicate before they all die. But there's also some weird things I don't agree with in this film. They kind of do way too much. They kind of cram the trilogy into one film, which doesn't make sense to me. I feel like out of the entire Resident Evil series, if you wanted to fucking make a full-on film series, you would want to savor that for 3 to 4 films, maybe. And because they're just cramming in so much, like you said, it's very messy. You're switching between these two narratives that just don't really make sense. For some reason, the writers decided that Chris losing half of his friends in one night was not enough motivation for him to hate Umbrella, so they decided to shoehorn this thing where he grew up in a Umbrella orphanage. No real reason for it, just kind of like, again, it doesn't make sense. It wasn't needed. It's a film where, like, as a fan, watching it the first time I enjoyed it. Second time, I could start to see a few holes. I could probably sit here and roast the fucking shit out of this movie, but I don't mind it. So I'm going to throw it in decent, because it ain't bad. You know, it's with all of its flaws and stuff, I would say it's a fun film to watch. I think as a Resident Evil fan, you'll enjoy it. But the problem with this film is that if you're not a Resident Evil fan, you're not going to know most of it. Well, exactly, that's the thing, right? You spend the majority of the film getting to know these characters and stuff. And then when they rush into the outbreak, like the third act of that film is non-existent. They just end up in the labs, end up fighting Willie and Birkin for like no reason. And you don't spend enough time with these characters to where when Leon picks up the rocket launcher at the end and he blows up Birkin, it's not deserved, you know? If it was like a full-on 2.5-hour film based on the events of Resident Evil 2, you have 2.5 hours to play with to build Leon up as a character. I didn't mind the whole hit, like, you know, him being a bit of a pussy kind of thing. I shot my teammate or whatever. Cool. I like that interpretation of Leon, right? As long as by the end of the film, after all of the events, he's now a badass. You know, he's no longer a child who the only reason he's still a cop is because his dad's got money, right? He now has something to kind of fight for. He's been through some shit. That's kind of the issue. You know, that's where they could have really focused on things. Instead, they just decided to set up for a sequel for whatever reason. Whilst pissing through the first 3 games for no reason. You know, they rushed through it. I think a lot of people were really disappointed by it. Again, I don't mind it. I think it's a decent film. It's an okay adaptation. I think out of all of these ones, it's one of the most loyal ones. But I think they blew their load a little bit. And I also think that someone working within Sony doesn't like Resident Evil or doesn't like the casting crew to this film because there was almost zero marketing. And in the UK, they only released it to one chain of cinema, which I don't think I've ever seen in my life with any film. You know, if you want to see a Marvel film or a horror film or whatever's come out, you can just go to whatever cinema and see it. It's weird that they only decided to release this film in one chain of cinemas. Again, a bit odd, in my opinion. They also put in a big kind of release date window as well. I think it came out in America months before we got it, which I know they used to do like 20 years ago. These days, with like the way the internet is and everything, we already knew that the film was bad way before we even got a fucking whiff of this movie, because the Americans got to see it first. And we're like, yep, this movie isn't very good. But yeah, I think we got one more thing, which is the Resident Evil Netflix series. I'm just going to throw it. I was going to put it in unbearable, but I'm kind of between poor and unbearable because I did watch all of it. I don't know. I think with the Netflix series, there's so much I can go on about. It's, you know, the best part about it was Wesker, obviously, Lance Reddick, but the rest of it was kind of shit. They kind of missed the point of Resident Evil. There's not really any main monsters in it. You know, lickers are in it for the good part of about 5 minutes in one episode. and it's mostly just a teenage drama, and it's weird to me. I don't know who they made this shit for, because it ain't Resident Evil fans, and it ain't teenagers. Because I mean, most Resident Evil fans are in their 20s to 30s at this point. They don't care about teenage drama. But then if they were making this film to teenagers, you know, by having these two bickering, trendy teenagers who know whatever, what fucking teenagers are playing these 20-year-old games? You know what I mean? It's just a bit odd. There's just such a miscommunication here. I like the concept of it, the idea that you've got like a scientist who has his kind of daughters, and the daughters are trying to work out why his dad's kind of weird and works for this shady company. You could have worked all of that into the Resident Evil canon. You could have made it a period piece in the 90s during Raccoon City. Two daughters, you could cash in on nostalgia then, you know what I mean? Them talking about things like, you know, the internet and movies at the time and Y2K and whatever the hell, right? While also investigating Umbrella and Unearthing stuff, and there was so much opportunity there. But I get what you mean though. Like, I mean, I watched all of it, I enjoyed it for what it is. I don't remember a damn thing except for Lance Reddick scenes, and he's only in about 30% of it. I'll put it this way, right? You know, the reason, like, Welcome to Raccoon City may not be the greatest film, but it has more in common with Resident Evil than Netflix's series. I think my personal theory with the Netflix series is that this was never intended to be an actual Resident Evil show. This was made by someone who had the storyline all planned out and everything to be some teen drama. The dad is a high-ranking officer in it, or a scientist, you know, so on and so forth. But then someone was like, look, mate, if I can slap the Resident Evil name on this and sell it to Netflix, we've got a deal. So that's where I think this Netflix series came from, because aside from the fact that it mentions Umbrella and a couple of Resi names, yeah, not my favourite. I think this is it. I think this is the final tier list. It looks good though. I think this is to kind of recap, we've got the OG Resident Evil film and Apocalypse in good. In decent, I've got Retribution and Welcome to Raccoon City. In bad, I've got Afterlife. In poor, I've got Extinction and a Netflix series. And in unbearable, in with the final one. Overall though, they can definitely do better with these films. I hope they do better with these films. I hope we see some kind of brand new Resident Evil film or IP on Netflix series or Amazon Prime series that pays so much respect to the originals, while also adapting it to an audience that will be able to enjoy it for what it is. You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, when you're adapting something from a video game to a TV show or a movie, you need to make it accessible to the, you know, to the general public, you know. But Resident Evil is a series that can do that. You know, we've got so, like, 20 plus years of lore about a shady company that does experiments on people and all that stuff. You can do so much shit with that. You know, you can make so much fire with that. But what do we think? Are we in agreement at our tier list? Are we in disagreement? What would you guys do differently?